Hi. As you're probably aware, COVID-19 has forced us to change the way we do things. And as a result of the governor's request that we not gather in large groups, the bishop has closed the churches temporarily. So I am speaking to you from my office and trying something new. So let us begin. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. In today's gospel, Christ is traveling near Jacob's well in Samaritan territory, and there he meets a lone woman in the middle of the day. This is perhaps the worst possible scenario for a rabbi. First of all, in Jewish culture at the time, men should not be alone with women. What's worse, this woman is a Samaritan, the people perhaps most hated by the Jews. And finally, a woman of good repute would never be alone at a well at midday. Instead, women would go in groups early in the morning to get water for the rest of the day. So this woman has waited until later because she's not welcome to join the others. And despite all of this, Christ, rather than avoiding her or sending her on her way so that he can get water without causing scandal, talks to her. His disciples are shocked when they return and find them conversing, though they are too polite and restrain themselves from saying anything. Though they do think it inappropriate, they still avoid those pointed questions people use to control situations, like, "What do you want?" or "Why are you speaking with her?" People are almost as skilled at insinuation as they are at exclusion. I have a personal experience of this. It goes back to my days at the University of Tokyo, where Japanese did not avoid such questions. They would act to censure other Japanese who dared to speak with me. Sometimes all it took was a stern glance, but in the rare case when someone stubbornly continued conversing, they would ask, "Why are you speaking to that?" thus attempting to shut down all exchange with me. And approaches were, of course, adapted to whatever the setting happened to be. At lunch after class, for example, when I spoke about something related to our prior conversation in the classroom, instead of responding to me and honoring what I was saying, people would look at me and say, "How can you use chopsticks?" They therefore exoticized me and refused serious interchange. The only people who were willing to be seen talking with me were those who felt themselves to be outsiders. Insiders were unwilling to lose those perks that come with such a status, and those at the University of Tokyo had climbed to the top of insider status and thus commanded the maximum perks. This explains why Christ's conversation with the woman at the well goes so much better than the conversation with the well-positioned Nicodemus from last week. Nicodemus, the Pharisee, had a lot more to lose. He had a lot more status, a lot more to lose in speaking with Christ, and therefore he sneaks in under cover of night. The woman at the well, on the other hand, is in a far less comfortable position. She's therefore less beholden to a certain way of seeing things. Our comfort can blind us to what is holy. We fear giving it up and embracing a new way of relating to others, which is exactly what Christianity asks of us. At first, the woman at the well makes the same mistake that most people in the gospel make when talking with Christ, the same mistake even that Nicodemus made. She takes his words literally. "Give me water. You don't even have a bucket," she exclaims. We really do not expect to be met by love in the middle of the day as we go about our chores, and it's understandable that she was not immediately aware of what was going on. It can be hard to believe. Christ persists, however, as he tends to do, and she begins to understand. And filled with hope, she goes to share the news with people in town, and many Samaritans from that city believed in him because of the woman's testimony. It's remarkable that any Samaritan would believe in a Jew, would trust a Jew. But Christ showed her how it was done. Love, real love, is contagious. That which is not said in love, on the other hand, is not Christian. We must check ourselves, as the disciples need to do, so that we do not speak to injure, speak to manipulate emotionally, speak to undermine. Such practices derive from ego and not from love. It may be that, like the disciples, we're unable to be as straightforward, honest, and loving as Christ. But growth starts when we recognize what we're doing wrong. The story of the woman at the well is not only remarkable because a Jew and a Samaritan learned to trust each other, but also because in the Gospel of John, this woman, this Samaritan of ill repute, is the first evangelist. Let that sink in. John writes that the first person to spread the good news was not even a Jew, and it was not even among the Jews that it was spread. Christianity was countercultural from the beginning, or perhaps more accurately, we should say, acultural. It was willing to open itself to whatever conditions permit people to become responsible members of a loving community. And that's our intent as Christians, to build that loving community. For that, we must put aside our fear of losing status. This does not mean, I have to add, that Christians should do just anything that someone wants of them. We're neither to be people pleasers nor unforgiving adherents of rules. Both of these approaches are attempts, in the end, to manipulate, to control. We seek to please people in order to get something from them that we want, and we attempt to impose our culture upon them really for the same reason, to get something that we want. Neither are we to find some middle ground, however, partially pleasing, partially wielding rules without compassion. Instead, we're to help give one another what we need in order to grow in community, assuming that someone is willing to accept that. Nicodemus was not. The woman at the well was. This can mean speaking the truth in love, as Christ did with both Nicodemus and with the Samaritan woman. To her, he says, "You're right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you've said is true." He does not humiliate her, nor does he avoid the truth. He speaks honestly and directly to her and invites her into a relationship of honesty and trust. If this had been a soap opera, he would have sent her away and gossiped about her to the disciples as soon as they returned. "You won't believe what I saw. A woman at the well, alone, in the middle of the day." You know how those Samaritans are. As Christians, we're not to throw away the rules, nor are we to insist on them when they stand in the way of communal relationships of responsibility and love. In Africa, where wine was almost impossible to come by and too expensive for most, the church had to decide how to provide for communion. And after some consideration, it was decided that Coca-Cola could be used. It was available in sterile bottles. It had a special position in that society, yet did not cost so much that it was prohibitive. The same substitution, however, is strictly forbidden in Europe and in America, or the Americas, where wine is readily available and has a special meaning that Coke doesn't possess here. We're therefore required to use wine. So it is interesting that Mr. Welch, a Methodist, specifically developed grape juice so that people could have an alcohol-free communion. I love that story. When determining a course of action, we seek always, as Christians, to be honest, be direct, not going behind the backs of others or leaving them to guess at our intent, thereby establishing relationships of responsibility and trust in which we care for one another. This is what Christ models for us at the well with the woman. His disciples were a little behind, but they knew well enough not to criticize openly the woman or Christ for talking with her. They were on their way. Being able to fulfill the Christian gospel, the Christian goal, is a constant endeavor. If we could get it all perfect every time, we really would not need each other. We all help each other to be less like Nicodemus and more like the woman at the well. Amen. Now for a little reflection on the process. I'm sitting here in my office, as I said, alone. So I'm talking into a camera, and I find it very artificial and difficult to do. My delivery, I can tell, is affected by this. I hope it didn't make it too difficult to absorb or to listen to the homily. Maybe I'll do better next week. I don't know, although I will confess to you, this is my third time trying. I've had various problems getting it right. So anyway, we'll see. And now we should all go, and I'm aware I touched my face once during the recording. We should all go and wash our hands. Wash your hands right now. You can never do it enough. And I look forward to the next time that we're able to be together. Goodbye.